Hey guys, welcome to the Mind Hacking Happiness Podcast. I'm Sean Webb. I've got an interview for you today that we actually did over at Two Seals and a Walrus, and I'm going to go ahead and do a new intro for this and just play it as is because it's right up our alley of understanding how the mind works to better take control of our minds. The guest is Dr. Jim Coan from the University of Virginia. If you've read the Mind Hacking Happiness books, you already know who he is. He is one of the first people, or the first psychologist, to prove in a brain scanner that our brains map other people and ideas and etc. to our sense of self, which then drives our simple nervous system into making our life crazy sometimes. And when we understand that whole process, we can take control of it and down-regulate it to a large degree. So with no further ado, here is the Two Seals and a Walrus podcast interview of Dr. Jim Coan.
Two Seals and a Walrus.
Hey guys, welcome to Two Seals and a Walrus. We are one seal light today, but we have an amazing guest for you, and you'll understand why I'm so excited about this episode as we move along and discuss the details of our topic today. With me, as always, or most of the time, Ben Johnson across the table, United States Navy SEAL. I am your co-host, the Walrus, Sean Webb. Today we have, from the University of Virginia, Dr. Jim Coan on the line with us. Welcome, sir.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
Excellent. I'm so excited and very geeked out on this episode and this interview and talking to you. And thank you for your time today, because I cited your work pretty heavily in one of the books that I wrote, Mind Hacking Happiness, Volume 1, the Red Book, which basically kind of tried to lay out how and why our emotions come to be. And if you can understand that process a little better and you understand the variables that come into that whole process, you can tweak those variables and get control of your entire emotional landscape, which literally can change your life, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. But you are one of the scientists that put actual rigor, research study to this topic and allowed me to have a scientific validation of how I thought things were working. But then you really came in, and your work and other, that was the first domino of a number of different studies that came out that basically proved the same thing. But your work was one of the first that I saw that proved that our sense of self, which is a thing in our mind that's the reaction to, our limbic system is always looking around for threats, and then a second question must be answered: a threat to what? Right? And our mind then creates this definition of self thing, which starts with our body. So, which is why you dodge out of the way when a baseball comes flying at your head involuntarily. It's a reaction thing. Your limbic system's taking over your muscle movement to get your head out of the way so that you can survive from today into tomorrow. You were one of the first people that started to prove that other things outside of our body can be attached to our sense of self and thus run the same exact defensive self mechanisms within the brain, making it much easier to understand, to say the defensive self circuits can be the same. They can run the exact same way. It's the definition of the self that can become super complex and then create our individual emotions about, the things that we connect to, the people that we connect to, like we care about grandma getting the flu. We care about the people that we work with, things happening in their lives. We have an emotional reaction to those things. This explains why we do that stuff. And so I saw your TED Talk on it, and I wanted to have this conversation with you, because the more people that understand this stuff, I think, the more people are going to be able to understand their emotions and maybe even take control of their emotions a little bit, because I know that the anterior cingulate cortex can only pay attention to one thing at a time. And if you're paying attention to your trigger, then you're going to be pissed off more and more, minutes into your life. But if you're looking at the process of how your emotion was created in the first place, then you can't be paying attention to that trigger, and then you're down regulating. Just kind of my pet theory from Matt Lieberman's Name It, Tame It work out at UCLA. But thank you for coming on the show. What got you into this stuff? You're a psychologist. What is your title at UVA?
I'm a professor of psychology at UVA, and I have a PhD in clinical psychology. But I did two sort of special emphases in getting my doctorate, which were research methodology as a field of its own, and neuroscience. So I really became super interested in, sort of how the brain was mediating people's responses to each other. Then that started a lot earlier. I started as an undergraduate working with people like John Gottman at the University of Washington.
Dude.
Yeah.
he's like super famous. Like John Gottman is the guy who started the Love Lab stuff, and then he figured out one of the only contributing factors to a long-lasting relationship or a long-lasting marriage, and figured it out scientifically, and he can listen to your conversation for like an hour and get to whether you're going to have a divorce or not to over 90% accuracy. Is that crazy?
Yeah, I did all that work with him in the early 90s as an undergraduate, and then after I graduated from undergraduate with my undergraduate degree at University of Washington, I was hired by him to run his lab, two of his labs. It was an incredible experience. He, I was just telling someone today about how he used to have me over to his house to teach me math, advanced math,
wow,
differential equations. During that work with John, I had become really interested now we hadn't done the marriage prediction yet.
Right.
We had or the divorce prediction yet. That grew out of the studies we were doing. It wasn't an hour long conversation either. It was 15 minutes.
Oh wow.
I became really interested in why some people were able to soothe each other even when they were in the midst of a fight.
Right.
Because talking about predicting the future of a relationship, if you could soothe each other, well, first of all, here's the thing that you guys both probably well know. When you get more physiologically aroused, you get stupider.
Yeah.
So your heart starts pumping. If you get up in front of a bunch of people to give a talk and there's a big audience out there, if you don't have a lot of experience, chances are you've lost 10 IQ points right on the spot.
Right.
Maybe more.
Yeah.
Because you're self-conscious, because of all that stuff you were saying about the anterior cingulate cortex, that you become vigilant for threats.
Yeah.
And if you become vigilant for threats, then there's two problems. You're wasting a bunch of energy and mind on figuring out what's going on with the threat. And the other problem is like an opportunity cost. You're not working on the task at hand. And in the way that you should be 2 feet in, right?
Right.
Especially if you're trying to solve a complex marital dilemma. So the thing is, when people get upset during a fight, they can't problem solve as well because they get physiologically aroused and because they start only paying attention to the stuff they're scared of.
Right.
Right. And, I'm afraid of men, for example, are deathly afraid as a general rule of female anger. Most men that I know would rather boil themselves alive than have their partner be angry at them. And,
that's true.
And so, yeah, right. And so, some of these couples seem to have an intuitive sense for this. Like the first thing we need to do, step one, is we need to reassure each other and soothe each other, help each other calm down physiologically.
Right.
Because then we can think better. And if we can reassure each other that we don't have to keep our eye on the threat, then we can also focus on the problem that we're trying to solve. Those couples, in fact, did much better later on, years down the road. They were more likely to be together, and they were more likely to be happy together, which is a whole different thing.
Right. Especially now in COVID times.
I was going to say, ask anybody who's alive for the last year.
Plenty of couples out there together not happy. You don't want that either. Unless you're, glutton for punishment.
Yeah, unless you just want to not be happy.
Yeah.
So what got you interested in making that transition of, like, how do you get to, I wonder how this is affecting their sense of self? Like, where does that leap come in?
So it's a little bit of a long journey, because one of the things that I was interested in was not just the person on the receiving end of soothing attempts,
yeah,
but the person on the giving end. How do they know? How are they empathizing
right
with their partner? And this led to a general interest in, how people empathize per se, right? Just in general. And, we'd done all these studies where people were, holding hands with a partner while they're getting shocked. Scanner. And,
See, no, that's one of the aspects of your work.
It's like Navy SEAL training.
That's one of the aspects of your work that I loved, by the way, is that we haven't told the audience this. Jim Coan loves to shock people.
I would say that's
famous people
bit of
do.
an overstatement. Let's just say I like to shock.
Most impactful people shock people habitually, one way or another.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
One way, the endogenous or exogenous,
whatever the case, right?
Like my science would stop there. Like I would say, okay, we're going to put this ankle zapper on you, and then we're going to start popping popcorn, and we're going to sell the cable rights.
Oh, this happened to me. So one of this brief digression, but it's your fault, so I'm just going to go with it. When we were testing out the apparatus, the shock apparatus, I'm the kind of guy, I don't want anybody to go through the experiment that I haven't endured.
Right.
Here.
So I was like, okay, put me in the scanner. We're going to test it out. We're going to test it out on me. And a research assistant who's a smart ass kept shocking me over and over again. And they thought it was really funny because I have this involuntary response to the shock threat where my legs spasm. So every time they would shock me, my legs would go, and they thought that was funny. So he kept giving me some bullshit line about how, oh, we got, it's still not working. We're not able to sync the scanner recording with the shock delivery. So we got to test it again. Meanwhile, he's got people going around the building, just drawing people in. Okay, come and look at Coan's legs. Check this out.
You guys got to see this.
Okay, we're going to shock him again. Kapow! And so, yeah, someone did that. But it wasn't me who did it. I was the victim.
Okay, so you paid your dues, and then you started pressing the button?
Yep, I started pressing the button, and we started asking not only what the brain of the person who was being soothed in the scanner getting shocked was like, but what happened in their brain when we shocked the person who was outside the scanner instead.
Right.
So we get a peek at how they're responding empathically to another person. And what we found was sort of shocking, you might say.
Waka waka.
I dropped that every time. And I never learned.
No, that's clean. Keep it going. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And what we found was that when we looked at the brain, while your friend, when we looked at, let's say it's Ben's brain. We got Ben in there.
Okay.
When we looked at Ben's brain while his friend was getting shocked, his brain looked a lot like it did when we were directing the shock at Ben.
Right.
Very similar.
Right.
Hard for a machine learning task to differentiate.
Right.
But when we directed it at someone that Ben had no idea who they were, their brains look really different. Now, parts of Ben's brain would get active. So Ben knows, maybe he doesn't. He's a Navy SEAL after all. But he let's pretend that he knows that shocking people is bad.
Go on.
And so regions of the brain that sort of are associated with that kind of affective evaluation would become active when we were shocking a stranger. But you wouldn't assume. There's no evidence that your brain was sort of assuming that the stranger would respond the way you did.
Right.
But there was all kinds of evidence that suggested that your friend would.
Right.
And it looked for all the world like there was a kind of a breakdown between the boundary that separates you and your friend as far as the brain's self was concerned.
Yeah, and to me, this is like, I don't know if there's a Nobel for psychology, but I mean, this is like amazingly a leap ahead in our understanding of how our psychological landscape works internally for me. in that it's easy to understand how, your body takes over and dodges you away from a baseball flying at your head. That's a protection of your sense of self, and your body is yourself. But then that right there, that is the first domino that starts to show, wait, your sense of self can also include the people around you, which is, your major first contribution. And that explains the difference of, why you can be nervous about a baseball flying at your head, and also a baseball flying at grandma's head in a different situation, or a different instant, or a different moment.
Absolutely.
You're using the same exact circuitry, but it's a defensive self mechanism that now grandma's on your self map. You love grandma, and grandma's part of your world, and all of the things that define you, and your memories, and your life story, and all the things that are connected, etc. And now this thing added to your, let's say, self map, which is a term that I use from Antonio Damasio. That your grandma gets basically mapped onto your sense of self, and then your regular circuits of defensive self pop in based on the other things that you're connected to. And then, Tiffany Burnett White took that another step to say, brand connections like Apple versus Android can then make that same type of connection. And Sam Harris has done the work to say, you don't have to go very much beyond Facebook to understand, but look, we have the fMRI study to show also that we get attached to politics and religion in the same way, and get vehemently upset when people start to attack those things, yada, yada, yada. But this is the moment. This is the moment where, you look on a screen and you say, there are the brain patterns associated with self. There are the brain patterns associated with fear and negative anticipation, whatever it is you want to call it in your subjective terms, to say, this is, I'm nervous about shocking my own body. And then you're looking at the brain scan that says, okay, I just put a loved one next to them, put the shocker on them, and the same exact pattern is showing up. That's a watershed moment as far as I'm concerned in psychology.
Well, thank you. It was a watershed moment for me personally. I was like, holy shit, what is this?
Right.
I didn't know, I hadn't been doing this I hadn't gone looking for this necessarily.
Right.
What we realized was that what we had on our hands, so to speak, that's another one I drop all the time. It's
You're full of dad jokes.
I am an endless supply of dad jokes. So what we found was really had more to do with identification than empathy per se. With empathy, you could say that in some ways Ben might be more empathetic with the stranger than he was with his friend, because he's just shortcutting with his friend. He's like, whatever I have, the friend has. That's a shortcut. That costs less to process by your brain than to try and rev up your prefrontal cortex to do a bunch of problem solving to figure out what your friend is experiencing, right? So it's the risk of this kind of selfing, we call it, is that Ben's going to be completely wrong. It's going to be a failure, we might say, of what empathy researchers call theory of mind, that another person has a different perspective than I do. So he might be more accurate with the stranger empathetically,
right?
But he's paying less, if you will. This is key. He's paying less for the empathy with the friend. And there's always a trade-off, right? You guys know there's always a trade-off. There's never not a trade-off.
Right.
That's the cruel joke of the universe. So whenever you develop an advantage, there's some cost to it. There's some cost to it somewhere. And the cost that comes with accuracy, where you think really hard, you try to figure out what someone else is feeling, is a cost in time and effort. And the payoff in potentially being wrong with your close friend is that you do it really quickly and with hardly any effort at all. And that's important because we need the brain. This is what I teach my students. Brains are lazy
as fuck.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
They are the laziest. They're so lazy.
Well, they burn like 20% of our energy, right? So, I mean, a savings there is
really what it is they're exhausted. Brains are perpetually exhausted. And the amount of blood that you have in your brain almost never changes. If it goes a little bit too much or a little bit too little, you get brain damage either way. The metabolic rate of your brain never changes. So when you're sitting down working through a really hard calculus problem, you're not working your brain any harder than when you're watching the Flintstones or something. It just feels harder because your brain, as a general rule, doesn't want you to use your prefrontal cortex that much. Because when you use your prefrontal cortex, you hate it.
Welcome to America.
Right. Welcome to all of our lives. Let's experience a moment of Zen.
Right.
just as we appreciate how much we don't want to send our blood, which is in short supply, to our prefrontal cortex. Because here's the thing. If the blood never changes, right, and the blood can't be everywhere at once, and it can't, not in sufficient quantities to really rev up, then what the brain has to do, what the different regions of the brain has to do, is essentially grant other regions short-term loans of blood and metabolic resources. Glucose.
Right.
And you know what's a big giant resource hog?
Logic,
working memory,
thinking,
contingency planning, vigilance for threats that are distal, that are far away. All of this requires your prefrontal cortex. And every time your prefrontal cortex starts revving up, it's a huge piece of real estate, because those things that it's doing are so hard to do, and other animals can't do them like we do.
Right.
And so,
or at least we presume they can't, right?
Yeah, it's a decent presumption. I mean, I don't see any other animals anytime soon, writing Hamlet.
Although my question, and we're going off on a tangent here just for a second. I see these whale brains, and I see these, the size of these things, and the intelligence level of, porpoises and dolphins and things like that, and where they can become multilingual. And I know people such as myself who speak one language well. But my question becomes, are we the most intelligent creatures on the planet, having created all the things that humans have created, or were we dumb enough to be looped into that whole thing where the whales were like, build buildings? Why? Create a society that causes all these additional pain points. Why? Maybe they're the intelligent ones that skip that whole thing. But
it's important to remember that with regard to brain size, especially, that brains are mostly just body moving machines.
Okay.
And what Peter Sterling, my idol, this neuroscientist at Penn, calls predictive regulators. So brains are basically going, what do I need to do? How do I need to do that? Where do I need to put the resources, from here to there, in order to make that happen?
Okay. Because
the body is just like the brain. There isn't enough blood in the body to adequately serve all of the organs simultaneously.
Right.
Surprise. So what that means is your body has to move blood around to priority places. There's certain exceptions to this. Your heart gets like carte blanche, whatever it wants, all the time. So does your brain, by the way. But your stomach doesn't. Your bowels don't. Maybe that's true for some of us more than others. But,
I get it.
Couldn't help it.
Your lungs don't.
So, yeah, right. So the brain is basically directing priorities for the systems of your body. And so this is why you don't pass out. Most of us don't pass out when you stand up, because your blood pressure actually starts to increase before you do it.
Right.
And that's so that when the blood all splashes down into your legs, which is more or less what happens because gravity, you don't lose too much blood from your head and lose consciousness. The blood pressure keeps it up there. So the brain is basically moving bodies around and making sure that the systems that need resources get those resources. And you look at something like an elephant or a whale, and they got a lot of body to keep track of.
Right.
And so they'll get a lot of brain commensurate with that. When it comes to more abstract kind of thought, I mean, there's a lot that they can do. Don't get me wrong. Elephants, dolphins, dogs. Holy crap, dogs. Octopi, perhaps, in a way that we can't quite understand yet, because they have a very different neural structure.
Yeah.
But there definitely is all kind of evidence that they do lots of very brilliant things, and that's fascinating. But when I was saying they're not likely to write Hamlet anytime soon, I'm sort of only half quipping there. They're really not going to do that, and it's not just about the text and the language.
Right.
It's about the ideas. The ability to ask oneself, what is the self? What am I doing here? What am I constituted of? How does this fit together with with the natural world and with my environment? What is the origin of the universe? These are things that are 100% uniquely human.
Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting to think that how much culture and how much of our life story and how much of other human beings in their communication of memes, let's say, that becomes an influential driving force in our lives to create that pattern of thought and introspection and things like that. Like, then questions arise in my mind, is the brain of something else capable of theory of mind? Like I've seen some studies where they assume theory of mind in intelligent animals such as horses, right? Where it's pretty clear that horses have a limited theory of mind, elephants have a limited theory of mind. So how much environmental influence comes into making our human experience unique in that way. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. Well, one of the most important things for an animal to do is to predict other animals.
Right.
Because they're your competitors and their potential mates and their potential cooperators, and they're all kinds of things. But you need to know whether, if you do this, what are they going to do for any of that to happen?
Right.
And so high premium on predicting other critters. There's lots of ways that animals try to solve this problem, but one of the ways that you can think about the cleverness of the species you've named is that they become increasingly clever at understanding, based on all kinds of cues, what the other critter's going to do next, what we might call their intent, or their intention. But I'm not sure that animals necessarily see it that way. Dogs are incredibly good at this. I used to have a couple of Australian cattle dogs. They're both dead now, and I'm sad about that. But one of them was part coyote, a coy dog, they call it.
Oh, wow.
From Arizona. And the half coyote, when I would throw the ball for them, couldn't do anything but look at the ball. So I'd hold the ball in my hand and I'd move it this way and that. You've probably done this, with dogs at some point, and they, follow the ball. But the other one, Cochise was her name. She would look at my eyes. Oh. And it got to the point where we could fake out Choya, was the other dog's name. I would take my eyes and go, and I would show her where I was going to throw the ball with my eyes, and she'd go tearing after the ball.
Oh, wow.
Is that intention? Yeah, after a manner of thinking.
Sure. That's cool. You're talking about dogs. We got a big dog under the table snoring at this moment.
Yeah, good.
He's the same way. I could have all of the cool treats and toys in the world and wave them around, throw them up in the air, and he just stare me right in the eye.
Yeah.
Ben,
that's a special gift.
Yeah, for sure.
Special gift.
He rescues and fosters big dogs. I don't know if you. What's your favorite breed? Like, explain a little bit about Randy.
Randy's he's a Greater Swiss Mountain Dog, and he was a gift from my current wife when I was just getting out, went through a divorce and got out of the military, went back down to Atlanta. So I was transitioning in a few different ways. And I just spent a third of my life in the military. So it was an interesting, complex change. And starting this new relationship and figuring out a new path. And so she had a Bernese mountain dog, which are just super lovey and dopey, and they're quirky and sweet and big teddy bears. And then he's just a cousin breed, one of the four. It's a Greater Swiss. They're the older of the four breeds. That there's just a bunch of big dogs, and so we ended up having the two of them, and then started be part of this organization for Bernese and Greater Swiss dogs in the southeastern area, I guess. And they have events with other dog owners so they can all get together and have little parades and whatever parties. But then they also have a facet of the organization that rescues dogs and fosters them, because these dogs they're expensive puppies when they're purebred. They're very delicate, their sensibility. You can't really negative reinforce like you can some dogs, or like you even have to for some. It's all positive reinforcement. They have a very delicate constitution. It's a very frail constitution. So you got to be really gentle. And people will get them, and they'll get them as like a collector's item because they're pretty and big. And then they'll ignore them, and then they won't understand how to train them properly, and they'll scold them. And then these dogs get, scared and somewhat broken, and they'll be nippy like you would expect any scared animal. And then they call the whoever animal control or something, and they're like, I got this aggressive 150-pound dog. So that dog's getting put down.
Yeah.
That's too big of a dog, too egregious of a term, of a descriptor. It's not an aggressive dog. It's mistreated.
So
I'd bite somebody too. If
Ben steps in and saves these dogs, and so
I get mangled by. I get bit a lot.
Anytime,
but I don't mind it.
Anytime you talk to him, he's got between like 5 to 8 of these huge dogs living with him in his house.
We've had up to 15 at a time.
That's lovely.
Yeah, it's nice.
The Australian cattle dogs, their nickname among ranchers is barkers and biters.
Yeah.
And I delighted in training them myself, because
lovely.
They're so smart and so earnest and so ready for action, ready for anything.
And instruction too. I mean, most dogs are not to categorize them as barkers or biters or good dogs or bad dogs. It's such a complicated animal, and each one requires its own unique interactions, and each one has an amount of stimulation that they require attention, or some become neurotic, like some of the German Shepherds and Dobermans and stuff. You have to interact with that animal and give it tasks and keep it like intellectually stimulated. It'll be neurotic. It's not a bad dog. You're a bad person.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to do your research. Don't ruin that animal's life because you wanted something on a leash for people to point out when you're walking in the park.
Do you still train dogs, Jim? Or how long do you do that?
I haven't trained a dog in a long time. When I was in graduate school, I got these two dogs, and I was becoming expert in clinical psychology at the time, and I was very interested in Skinnerian behaviorism. I remain so. I think there's a lot of that's still really relevant. And what Skinner taught us was that for any critter, really, almost any critter at all, down to like sea urchins, positive reinforcement works better.
Right.
Yeah.
Because critters need stuff, and you can dole it out in smaller doses, and they don't hate you after.
Yeah, you don't have to develop a form of resentment between you and the critter in order to give it a fear of a negative repercussion.
Exactly.
The foundation of that is that they know that you can make them afraid. So
Right.
if you're building a relationship based on, well, if you fuck this up, I'm going to hurt you bad.
Yeah.
Then that go back to why a lot of marriages don't work. Stop using fear as propaganda to get people to conform to you.
Does it? Do you
Oh
know?
my God. You should read What I Learned from Shamu.
Oh fuck! Is it what you learned, or is it a book called What I Learned?
It's a book called What I Learned from Shamu.
Awesome.
and it's written by one of the orca whale trainers. This is an older book, so it's not, they don't really keep them in captivity much anymore.
Right.
It's pretty inhumane, but the point is, she was like, she learned all these techniques for training whales, so they didn't kill her.
Yeah.
And she started applying them to her husband, and was like, wow, this works really well.
Go figure.
Just treat my husband like a dog, literally, but know how to treat dogs.
Right. Facts.
That's awesome. I'd be interested to find out if a little bit of stress from the limbic system of the dog would shut down their prefrontal cortex.
What little of it they have, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's not hard to shut
actually,
that down.
that was a little bit of a joke, but as my friend and colleague Brian Hare at Duke University could explain in much greater detail, learning about dogs can teach us a lot about humans, because humans have developed, a habitat that's mostly comprised of other humans.
Right.
So humans long ago sort of uprooted from a specific geographical environment, a terrestrial environment, and sort of looked inward, became each other through self-other overlap, and became hyper cooperative. Our ability to, if I point at a thing, you will look where I'm pointing. And believe it or not, most critters, including most of our genetic closest relatives, species-wise, chimps and such, won't. And that's because they're not so good at sharing attention as we are. But once we created this habitat that's fundamentally social, one of the things that you learn about in behavioral ecology and in biology is that anytime you create a habitat anywhere on Earth of any kind, a bunch of critters will try to inhabit it because it's a way to survive.
Right.
Well, dogs, and by the way, the coronavirus, adapted themselves to our social habitat. And so when you start really learning about how dogs interact with humans, you start learning a lot about the human social habitat, because that's how they survive. So that's why dogs look at our eyes, so often, or why dogs will respond to a pointed finger, or why they're so sensitive to human sensation, human moods and behaviors. They're so good at training. They're so cute, right? They're so good at being cute. What does that have to teach us?
Because it makes us happy.
Yeah.
And it
makes us happy,
reinforces
right?
our desire to keep them healthy and alive.
And it turns out it does even more than make us happy. It makes us safe.
Yeah.
Feel safe when they're around, especially when they're around our food.
Yeah, which makes them feel safe.
Yeah.
Because they kind of see us as like this strange, all-powerful thing,
Right.
It's like the strange immortal being that doesn't seem to age throughout their lifetime, always has the resources to give it what it wants. It's a strange dynamic there.
Man, I've been gifted.
If we could get out of our prefrontal cortexes a little bit more, we're sort of, in the best way possible, we're sort of each other's dogs.
Right, we should be.
Yeah.
Serving each other's needs. Wow.
You lock your dog in your truck and your wife in your truck and you leave for 3 hours and come back. Which one do you think will be happy to see you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Time to stop harboring all that pain and resentment.
Humanity would be better if they acted more like dogs.
And if maybe let's turn it around. Better if we acted more like dogs.
For sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're certainly part of it.
All of humanity. Did I not say that right? That's what I meant. Is that
jerk.
all of humanity would be better
kidding.
if we acted like dogs.
You need to work on that self-map, dog.
So where is this, generally speaking, the sense of self is now opening up a whole bunch of Jim, one of the things that I did as an extrapolation of this base model being, looking pretty accurate as far as a predictive model of how a person might react to a specific piece of environmental exposure or a thought that flies through their head, or et cetera. You can, at the point that you can start mapping out a person's self from their perspective, and you can start creating perception modeling of how they see things and whether or not they're going to see something as a threat to a particular item on their self map or not. You can start to create a predictive model and algorithms of how human beings might react emotionally to things. Where is this science going, besides a horrible dystopia that now you can have an artificial general intelligence emotionally manipulating the masses 24/7, 365? I see positive aspects of this being, you could create an artificial intelligence that was able to create a theory of mind self map for another human being, and then be a great companion, like to octogenarians in a nursing home that don't have anybody else to visit them. You now can have an artificial intelligence that can have a very personal conversation with the individual that they understand. At least they have a rudimentary self map for. They have a rudimentary understanding of how perceptions can be created within the mind of this individual. And now you can have somebody, and we're dipping into the quality of health of individuals being greatly tied in science to their connectome and the people that they're connected to, and their robustness of their network, their social network, et cetera. When you start to create artificial intelligence that can have a human-like, emotionally intelligent conversation, man, that's some amazing stuff that can start occurring. Is that the kind of thing that we're looking at in the future, or what's next for this type of science?
Well, one of the things that we have to appreciate is why we self this way, thinking of self as a verb.
Yep.
Why do we do it this way? And the answer to that is so that we can use our predictive regulator of a brain to make better decisions about where to send its blood when our bodies do stuff. That's literally the answer. That's why we self the way that we do, I think. And the reason I think that is because let's take the example of a table. We have a table, a desk, let's say, and we've got to move it up a flight of stairs, right? If we do it ourselves, that entails a certain amount of effort to be predicted, right?
Right.
And even as we shift into something more closely resembling sympathetic arousal, and we send a bunch of glucose into our bloodstream to fuel our muscles, and we get ready to go, and our heart rates get up, and then we lift the desk and we scuff the desk and we bump the walls and ruin the paint job and hurt our backs before we get to, because the brain's not that great a predictive regulator. But we get it up there, right? But now you've got another person with you, just one other person. And that other person, let's say you self with, you guys overlap, your circles in the Venn diagram overlap substantially,
right?
In your sense of self. And that means that you can coordinate. Well, first of all, that means that you've probably spent a lot of time with each other or have had similar experiences, because we don't just self willy-nilly with everybody.
Right.
And the reason that that's important is because that makes your shortcut of not having to predict what they're going to do
not a shortcut.
Right. It makes it pay off.
Yeah.
And so then you guys lift the table up and you spend less than half the effort and don't scuff the walls or the table, and you don't hurt your back. Great payoff, right? So this is the reason why we self the way we do. We extend the boundaries of our capability by including others into our sense of self. Their arms become our arms. Their knowledge becomes our knowledge. Their memory becomes our memory. And that's literally true. There's something that a psychologist named Dan Wegner, rest in peace, came up with called transactive memory. He didn't come up with it. He identified it. He saw it happening and was the first to document it, which is that the more we get to know each other and the more intimate our experiences are with each other, the more we start to remember each other's lives for each other. In other words, you start to carry some of my biography
right
in your memory that I don't devote to memory, right? And that's a huge savings because remembering is a lot. So what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is your question, Sean, is is there the possibility to take advantage of this with tools that we have? And the answer unequivocally is yes. And we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years already. When one of the things we get so excited about when a critter starts using a tool, if I take this thing and I use it to get grubs out, and eat the grubs off the stick like some chimps do, it turns out that our understanding of what our self is capable of extends to the end of the stick, not just my fingers anymore.
Right.
That's part of what's going on with a tool. So we can look at things like, let's say, this is another thing that Dan Wegner did. You can look at the Google search bar. People incorporate the Google search bar into their sense of self because it affords them a kind of access to knowledge that decreases the effort they have to devote themselves. And that's, we evolved to do this with each other. And now, but it's like in the olden days, we were each other's iPhones. And now we have iPhones.
That makes a lot of sense. I had I have a friend, Dr. Julie Albright from USC. She's a digital sociologist, and she wrote a book, Left to Their Own Devices, and talked an entire book with some amazing stories and stuff like that. But basically talked about the science of us becoming kind of untethered from each other and becoming tethered to technology that isn't tethered to anything on the other end, really.
Yeah,
and
that's the scary part. That's the scary part because it doesn't really have our interests in mind in the same way.
It doesn't have any blood to drive that reciprocation. So you're talking about a general intelligence, then until you put a beating heart and a blood supply that's finite and very fickle and delicate.
Yeah, on the other end.
That needs a regulation that only comes from hundreds of thousands of years of a development of an understanding of that biological system, and a collective understanding shared with developing through communities, then you can't just come up with a solution. You can't even just put somebody else's heart and blood into a machine. It will never, without its intangible source consciousness feed that was already in it, cannot be imbued with the understanding that we've accumulated over our time.
Yeah.
It will never reciprocate the kinds of desires and ethical platforms that we lean on to support each other for the betterment of ourselves and the entirety of the species long term.
Yeah.
Or at least not without drawing 1,000,000 megawatts.
Well, at this point,
filling a room
with the assuming that the consciousness is this it's this field energy that's non-local, and there's a source feed, and it's part of the ambient vibratory field in the universe. You're talking about something that would require the amount of computing power and energy that is existent in the entirety of the universe from the beginning to the end of time.
Yeah, and so we're kind of left with the Turing test of
depending on our understanding of ourselves.
Right.
That the Turing test is flawed because you're assuming that a human being understands human beings entirely, and no one ever will. So there will be things that likely will pass the Turing test due to the complexity. However, they will never be as intelligent as us.
True, but my question then becomes, is good enough? Like, it's always going to be, I know from, just this deep thought that I put into this whole process of creating artificial emotions for simulated personalities, which I guarantee you give me the right team in a certain amount of time, I can put together a reaction intelligence that you would not be able to discern emotionally, except for the physiological responses of, like the feedback loop of the face and things like that.
The physiological responses.
The physiological responses. But from an emotional processing perspective, I can guarantee you that I can create from a text-based interface something that would not be that was something that would be indistinguishable from an actual human being for most folks. So,
For most folks,
well, you
it's
know
the
what?
difference
But here's the thing.
between a virtual reality blowjob for a virgin that's 60 and a virtual reality blowjob from a dude who's been getting them since he was 12 from
Yes.
everyone he wants.
Right.
Who's going to be satisfied by that really high-tech virtual reality blowjob? That adult virgin will likely want to marry that machine because of the connectivity it's never experienced.
but here's the question. At the point that you've surpassed that for the individual, does that then have the physiological responses that they need to have a true connection with another human being? Like, can you create the surrogate? Can you create the technical surrogate? Go
Can
ahead.
I jump in here?
Yeah,
Please.
please do.
I think you're
No,
both
guest,
right.
you cannot jump in at all.
Shut up. Hey, Neil, get this guy out of our...
Look, it's your
Dead.
It's a lot to unpack.
I just want to collect myself for a second.
Yeah.
No, the here's the thing I think that you're really bringing up, Ben, and I want you to know that I thought that what you said, not the blowjob part, but before that, was really eloquent, and
Thank you.
and right on, and that is because what you're really talking about is having a stake, is having an investment, and here's the thing that we also have to realize about the critical difference between an iPhone or a Facebook page
Right.
and a live human person. And that is that the live human person is a pain in the ass.
So at what
And
point
that's-
do you
and that's-
compromise to keep it?
You have to invest your resources
Fact.
in that person, and here's the critical piece: they have to invest in you because you also
Are a pain in the
are
ass.
a pain in the ass.
And that's what gives the depth and texture and true intrinsic beauty to long-term
Yes.
relationships is
Yeah.
the adoption of the ass pain, not their problems, your problems with them.
That's right. So you have to then not only overcome that cost, but you have to you can be relatively certain because of your natural history, your evolutionary heritage, that you're going to experience returns on that investment that are going to be like real nutrition.
Right. It's
Whereas
very much
whereas
like it.
you know, Facebook is more like, you know, snacking. It's like eating a bag of Doritos.
Yeah.
You know, technically you
You're
can
eating.
survive. I don't know for how long, but you can.
Yeah.
But the thing is, here's the key that here's the key to technology that I would love to just sort of place in front of you two and let you have it out. Because one of the reasons that technology is so alluring and so addictive, it's not just because of those little pellets of positive reinforcement we get. It's because one of the things that's also reinforcing is how little investment we have to make.
Right. But
And
there's a
that
cost
provides
somewhere.
an illusion that provides the illusion that we're going to get those dividends for much cheaper. And
Correct.
the brain, being exhausted perpetually, being lazy, is going to take that shortcut every time if
Hey.
it thinks it will get the same payoff.
Unless you understand unless you truly deeply
Yeah.
understand the entirety of the concept that you spoke about earlier. For every shortcut, there is a reconciliation at some point somewhere. And if the entirety of the species is attempting to make the most aggressive, transformative shortcut in all of our evolutionary history, that doesn't sound like something you would like to be around for the reconciliation of.
Yeah, but boy, it's so tempting because look, I not only do I not have to worry about you dying and forgetting part of my biography, but Google has distributed multiply backed up data centers all over the world that probably have little bits of me in it that I don't have to hold on to, and I barely have to. They're collecting that shit without me even trying.
Right.
And so, to say that it's a meager investment is kind of an overstatement in a funny way.
Not yet. It's not yet.
Not yet, right? Because and also we have to keep in mind again, and I think this is a big part of what you're saying. We have to worry about the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is that we are not going to have that hand to hold.
Right.
You know, when we're on our deathbed. And listen, deathbed, right? Let's talk about what life is all about. You know, you have, let's say you have 10 minutes to live,
Right.
right? And you might think, well, it doesn't really matter what I'm going to do because I only have 10 minutes. Bullshit. It matters tremendously what you're going to do. When I have a friend, is a recent episode of my podcast, a guy named Tim Cunningham, who directs some of the training for the medical school at Emory University.
Awesome.
He did a bunch of work with dying children during the Ebola crisis. He was a pediatric nurse. And by the way, a clown, a literal.
God bless him. That's a tough job working with kids in a crisis.
Yeah.
I listened to that episode. It was a great episode. Circle of Willis is your
thanks.
podcast, right? Circle of Willis.
Yeah, that's the one.
And then that's the Circle of Willis, by the way, is the blood flow for the central brain, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's cool. I love that. So sorry to
Also,
interrupt.
the name of my ill-fated band from the 90s. But because he had training as a professional clown before he went to nursing school and then got his PhD in public health and on and on, he was with these kids. There's a kid that he tells a story about in one of the episodes of the podcast, and he says, you know, this kid was really not doing well. He was going to die, and his sister was there with him, and his sister was really worried. And someone said, you know, throw this little bag of nuts to him, and you know, do a juggling act, and then toss the nuts to him and see if he wants to juggle with you. He's like, what are you talking about? This kid's in pain. He's got his crazy fever. His organs are dying. He's not going to do this. But it turns out the kid did, and he threw the kid the little thing of nuts after doing a little juggling act, and then the kid laughed, threw the bag of nuts to his sister. The sister threw it back. They start laughing together. His sister lights up with joy. The kid has a period of joy, just crazy joy, laughter. Everybody's happy for a moment, and then he gets exhausted, predictably, because he's dying, and he and shortly after, indeed dies. So the question is, what is the meaning of that joyful moment? And the answer is that it means everything. It's what life is.
Right. Yeah, and I am a wholehearted believer in that philosophy that, you know, basically kind of was introduced to us back in ancient Greek philosophy, that, you know, the difference between hedonia and eudaimonia, it's all about eudaimonia. It's all about the joy that you can glean from this existence. It's all about getting by the negative anticipation, the negative emotion, the negative reactivity, the sadness, all the things that we like.
Fear of death.
Yeah, the 2/3 of the emotional spectrum that we have negative words for compared to the 1/3 that we have positive words for, our negative bias. It's all about finding our way back into that eudaimonia, that wellspring of good, according to Marcus Aurelius, that is forever flowing if you find it. And those moments are what life is all about. Those are the moments that create great memories. Those are the moments that fill your heart and connect you with other human beings and kind of sync you with this unseen sine wave of love, existence, life, energy, whatever you want to call it, that is, when you're in tune with it, there is nothing else like it.
Right.
Yeah. It's and you know, it's a little bit of a false choice too, because eudaimonia often leads to hedonia.
Yeah.
And you know, you think about that little kid. I don't know if he was reflecting on the meaning of his existence right at that time.
No, he was enjoying, basking in the hedonic happiness of the juggling.
He was laughing.
That's all that
and
matters.
feeling love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's and so there's this dynamic of hedonia and eudaimonia.
Right.
You know, in Tim's memory, that's one of the most meaningful experiences of his life, and it's because he was able to provide a real moment of joy in an existence that may have only lasted in any form in that kid's short lifetime.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's, you know, touching on that episode that you did with Dr. Cunningham was amazing because, you know, I point this out, a lot of people will look at, comics or, stand-up comics or comedians or something like that. And, look down upon that life of getting on the road and going to drive to these comedy clubs and stand up in front of people. But I mean, when you make it your focus in life to try to stand in front of a crowd and help them experience one of the greatest physiological responses that the human body has, and I would even argue that it's probably even just a little bit better than orgasm, that, laughter is something that can happen spontaneously. It can happen just about anywhere.
You can share it with a lot of folks, and nobody gets mad at you.
Right, exactly. Nobody puts a label on you or calls you a laughter offender if you're sharing laughter without consent. So there's that whole argument. Let's not go down that path. But at the same time, if you're spending your life in dedication to helping people feel that physiological response and that psychological wave that comes after that, man, you're one of the greatest human beings on the planet.
And greatest manipulators.
Yeah, and greatest manipulators, certainly.
People use that term and they scoff at it and snub their nose at it as if that weren't the most desirable quality in human beings.
Yeah, there's a mastery of manipulation at that point. Right, yeah, and it's a positive. It's a positive.
Each other like dogs.
We should be manipulating each other so effectively that people want to spend the rest of their lives with you, because no matter how down and out they get, you can backdoor that without their understanding of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets back to in relationships, you can't angry a person into wanting to be with you.
No.
You can't demand, if
you can't logic it either.
Want to hang with you, and you're like, well, you have to hang with me. Well, that's not any fun.
No.
Right.
We want to do that.
You can't piss off a girl into sleeping with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on what her relationship with her father is like.
Yeah.
That's a whole different. That's a whole different can of worms.
Within wheels there.
Right. That's a hat on that. We'll save that one. We'll put a pin in that one. Like from my current, real quick before we cut away, my current relationship, I guess running back real quick to the technology thing, we were talking about that being a shortcut, and it's not a meek investment yet, or a meager investment yet. However, I don't have social media. I really, really appreciate the amount of knowledge I have at my fingertips. I don't invest in the social interaction or the pseudo-social interaction online. I also take it upon myself to use that tool to gain as much usable information as I can, with the understanding that it may not always be there, so that when the reconciliation comes, the investment's not up. A lot of people don't know how to make fire. A lot of people don't know the climates and different flora fauna indicators in particular regions of the world that are universal across those bands of latitude. A lot of people don't understand foreign languages or the subcultural complexity that comes from those, and the etiquettes and things that don't necessarily exist in a digital world. The nuances of human interaction, they are not only lost in the sea of information that you can just Google, but also transformatively bastardized by social media, and it's creating a lot of complex issues. So it's not a bad investment yet, but when people like my wife or like her friends or my new friends in this new world ask me questions like, why don't you ever get worried about things like money? Why don't you ever get worried about the conflicts, the riots, or why don't you listen to politics, or why are you so chill about everything? It's because I don't need technology to live. I certainly don't need it to be happy or make my wife happy. And she knows that I'm not saying those things to lie to her and trick her into being with me. She knows that those things are accurate statements and observations about who I am. And I never told her once that I would never hurt her. I never told either of my wives I would never hurt them. I told them I would always fix anything that they allowed me to.
Wow.
Because that's a reality.
Yeah.
And there's no shortcut in that investment. It's on them whether or not they're willing to make that same compromise that I very clearly am not putting on fronts about. And one of them wasn't, and the other one was. And one of them is the best relationship, most constructive and healthy one I've ever had.
Yeah, and that's tough to find in a relationship too, because when you're in there with somebody else, you're talking about their theory of mind and their emotional reactions to things. Because I know what you're talking about, and some people may need clarification that we're not talking about physical abuse. You never promised to hurt them. It is more of a kind of a very gruff.
I'll never be everything that you want.
Direct psychological response is what you're talking about that might, trigger the wrong emotions or feelings or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
And that's tough to find in a good relationship.
It's easy to point out.
Yeah.
And if we just communicate effectively, you point the right things out, you point everything that matters out, then it's real easy to sift through the relationships that are likely not going to work unless there's some massive, like, dramatic transformation in both perceptions,
Yeah.
It's becomes really important because shit happens.
It's going to.
It's going to. That you guys learn how to repair.
Right.
And I don't know if either of you guys have kids.
Yeah. I do.
But one of the most amazing things you can do for a child is apologize to them when you've acted like a jackass.
Fact.
So you're not infallible and scary and rude.
And you teach them. You
and
teach
you
them.
Model.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because at the point that you've made a mistake and they feel like you've made a mistake because they're hurting, and you come out with the apology and you come out with, that's a behavior that they're learning at that point to say, hey, I can screw up in the future and I can, and we even, I taught my son what a correct apology is. It is, I'm sorry for whatever the behavior was.
Yeah.
And then explain the reaction a little bit. I thought, whatever it was, and I probably should have XYZ. And those are the three components of a good apology. And that's a learned behavior at that point, that you're stopping yourself to say, and one of the things that I had to learn myself is my dad was never wrong. Right. So I learned a behavior that turned into a horrible pattern in my early life that I was never wrong. Right. And you pile on top of it a decent IQ, and then you're creating a friggin' monster. And I was an asshole for a large number of years based on the fact that I was right a lot of the time, and I thought I was right 100% of the time. And even when I wasn't right, then it was, somebody else's, it was a deflection on my part, and yada, yada, yada. And I never really learned how to apologize or say I'm sorry. And that was a skill that I had to learn. And I am so grateful I'm able to pass that to my son, to say, it's okay to fuck up because we're human and we're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. And it's so important to do that with children, because children are closer to being dogs than your wife will be. in a very specific way. They're gonna love you no matter what.
Yeah, that's true.
No matter what.
Yeah.
They need you to survive.
Yeah.
And so when you do something bad to them, when you yell, do something crummy, they're in a state of conflict because they love you anyway. They're going to love you anyway. But then they're like, oh no, how do I reconcile this?
Right.
Yeah.
And what you do is you help them reconcile it. You go, look, I'm your dad. I love you. You love me. I'm messed up. I'm sorry. They go, oh, here's what you do when you love someone and you do something bad. You say sorry. And that's how you reconcile this conflict.
Yeah.
Of loving someone and that someone did a shitty thing.
Yeah.
And if they can learn that early and grow up doing that, you've given them an unbelievable advantage in life.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. Well, I'm a complete believer in that now, and I love what having a son has taught me in how much I don't know about life and how I need to improve, and how thankfully he's going to be a better version of me as he grows up. I'm learning so much from this kid. It's amazing.
That's great.
You have any kids?
Love it. I have two kids.
How old are they?
8 and 10.
Oh, so you're right in there too.
Girls.
Okay.
What's that?
You're right in there too. Mine's 11.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, this is an amazing time. I love these conversations that we have on this podcast.
Yeah, it's so nice.
I'm looking at the clock. I know we're going a little late. Jim Coan, where can we find your stuff online? Because I got to tell you, your podcast is amazing. I love the episodes that you put out. I'd love a little more regularity on those things, by the way. But
yeah,
So get to work.
yeah, I'm trying to get some staff help out with that.
Yeah, so tell us about that. Where do we find you? Where do we find your work? What's going on?
It's circleofwillispodcast.com.
Mm-hmm.
where you can find the podcast, and you can. And by the way, they're the kind of things. The podcast is the kind of show that, they don't easily go out of date, so you can really learn about stuff.
Yeah,
is my hope, and learn about people. My lab website is you can just go to jamescoan.com or affectiveneuroscience.org. It's a little bit more of a mouthful. Or just Google Jim Coan or James Coan, and you'll get plenty.
Yeah, because you have like TED Talks online and other videos and
TED
things.
TED Talks and a bunch of news articles. I've written op-eds. I've done amicus. I've done a lot of stuff.
Well, I really appreciate your work in the field, because I tell you, I think, and I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, if there's, someday a Nobel for psychology starts being given, this kind of work is, I think, up there for, an award, because, this first domino of us understanding our sense of self is the complex thing in our body that the simple nervous system can then work off of. And the ideas that we connect to in life, we need to be very cognizant of and very conscious of, because those things will determine our emotional landscape for the rest of our existence here on the planet. I mean, that kind of stuff is world-changing science, and I think we'll see that as it develops more and more into the future. But I mean, you're on the forefront. You're on the first wave of that, and I really appreciate your efforts in this space and your insight and your openness, and you're a genuine human being. And I know you care about people, which is why, one of the other reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you love people indiscriminately. And I dig that about you, and I appreciate you spending this time with us today.
Well, it's been a lot of fun for me, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
We'll do this in the future. We'll have Doug back. He'll add his comedic repartee and
I want to come get my CAT scan too.
Okay, yeah, bring your CAT scan.
Yeah,
I'll have a look around. It's always good to know that there's a brain in there somewhere.
yeah. I need some proof. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's comforting.
Yeah.
All right, well, you guys, as our viewers, know what to do. You got to like and subscribe and share, and go check out Jim's links and whatnot. And our stuff is available in the store now, twosealsandawalrus.com store. You can get this awesome T-shirt that I have on. This is your brain, and this is your brain on psilocybin. Any questions? This is a graphic of an actual study that studied the human brain on psilocybin and all the connectivity that occurs. And if you want to help us bring this Schedule 1 controlled substance to veterans around the world who are struggling with TBI and PTSD and stuff like that, that's the kind of stuff that you're going to be supporting when you buy our merchandise. So get on there, get that going. We love you guys. Talk to you soon. Peace.
Two seals and a walrus.